All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Design, Build, Hunt podcast. I've got almost a whole crew here with me tonight. I've got Greg from Ohio, Jake from Michigan, and Lee from Tennessee. We're missing Mr. Sam Billhorn. He is out tonight, but that's all right. We're going to have a good discussion anyway. Guys, welcome to the show.
How's it going, Josh?
Yep. Hi, Josh.
Well, Jake, I think we're all doing okay, but I don't think any of us are doing quite as well as you are this evening. You mentioned in one of our last recording sessions of how you're trying to raise the bar for the state of Michigan, show what's possible for hunters in Michigan. And man, you got it done on a dandy.
He was a nice buck. We had an opportunity at the oldest deer that we were seeing on camera up until this point of the season, and yeah, we were getting him pretty consistently since about mid-September. But he was always just kind of moving at night, just doing what old bucks do. They're pretty reclusive, and it wasn't until recently that he kind of showed us on our cell cameras that he was going to start moving a little bit earlier in the evening. And so we kind of made a game time decision to push in last Friday, the 20th, and take a chance at him. And fortunately, he did again come out kind of around 7 o'clock, and we were able to put a good hit on him and yeah, come away with a pretty nice deer. I think he was I sent the teeth to a couple guys that I know that are pretty good at Asian deer. I think he was around 4.5 years old. So for our area, that's a very old deer. So it was pretty exciting to take that deer off of our family property after all the work we've done on it, and especially having my son there for the recovery. It was a pretty special occasion.
Right. Man, that's incredible. Beautiful deer. Folks can go to your Instagram account and see some pictures of that bad boy. But is that a deer you've had history with in the past? Or...
Yeah, so it's I don't know where he was when he was 2 years old. Here in Michigan, like we never even name our bucks, just because just the same reason we don't name our chickens. As soon as you name one, it's it's gonna die. So
Right.
we don't really name our bucks, but we did have history with this deer. Last year we saw him as a 3-year-old, and he lost one of his antlers. So there was a pretty good chance that, like, guys in Michigan, they'll shoot anything. They'll shoot spikes, they'll shoot 4 points, but if they see a deer run around with one antler, they're not going to shoot it for I don't know why. But I had a pretty good idea that this deer was going to make it. So we just kind of watched him, and he was on our property a lot last year. And then we had him throughout January. Knew he survived, and then kind of watched him a little bit throughout the summer. Didn't get a whole lot of summer pictures, but we did get him a couple times in August in velvet. So those are some pretty cool pictures. And then a lot in September, a lot in October. So, and we had a pretty good idea where that deer was bedded down, pretty good idea where he wanted to go in the evening. Just had to remain patient to let the deer tell us when he was going to be huntable. So we only hunted. That was my 4th sit of the season. So October 20 was only my 4th time going out, but it was a good one.
Yeah, man. And it sounds like it was a combination of, number one, letting the deer tell you, but then also a little bit of an aggressive move. Like, you were kind of back and forth. But I shouldn't die on that specific day. But there were some things that came together to make you think, yeah, this is probably the day.
Right. Yeah. He was getting closer and closer to shooting hours, both in the evening and in the morning. But he wasn't quite there yet. And last Wednesday, I think I even told you this, Lee, when we were when you called me, that the deer that I was after showed up at 7 o'clock. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. It was a really warm day. The farmer had just cut his bean field, and I did not think that deer was going to come out on that day of all days, but he did. And so not only did he come out at 7, but he also was making a scrape right after that. And he wasn't really making scrapes until that point. So what that told me is that he's kind of feeling that pre-rut itch. And so there's a good chance that he's going to start showing up a little bit more consistently during daylight. And we're coming up on the, the 19th, 20th of October. That's normally when these deer start to move a little bit more during daylight. And Thursday was supposed to rain all day. Friday was supposed to rain for most of the day and stop around 4 o'clock. So I knew I had a pretty good opportunity to slip into that spot while it was raining. He's kind of been, you know, bedded down for the last day and a half. Maybe he was going to get up again during shooting hours and hit that same spot. So it was a little bit of a risky move just based on the location. It was going to be kind of all or nothing. If he didn't show up, there was going to be a good chance that I was probably going to bust him when I got out of the stand, or he was going to know that I was there, and then he would probably change his pattern. But luckily, fortunately for us, he did come out at the same time, and yeah, we were able to capitalize on it.
So you guys just get one archery buck in Michigan, right? Or one buck total?
So we can shoot 2 bucks, but I normally only shoot one. So I don't.
Okay.
Now if there's another one out there that shows himself later on, that's you know around that age class, then I would probably shoot a second deer. But I don't. I try to limit myself to 1 buck. Just
Right.
because I want to continue to build that age class or age structure throughout the neighborhood, and if you continue to shoot 2 bucks every year, you're just going to kind of take away from what you have. So
Right. Right. Well, man, I got to tell you, you made me think of a new deer management strategy for there in Michigan. If you could just tranquilize all your bucks during the summer and lop one of their antlers off,
right,
that way,
yeah,
that way, folks maybe let them get through for another year or two. I think you
yep,
might be doing all right there.
yeah. It's kind of a blessing when you see one running around with one antler, because it's like, okay, they might not take a shot at that one, and fortunately that this guy made it. So and he was
Yeah.
everywhere. So I think that a lot of people did see him. Like a couple of the neighbors did. Go, saw one with one antler run around, but I didn't want to shoot him. It's like, oh, thank you.
Perfect. Perfect. Oh man, very good, very good. Well, guys, I don't know what episode number this is, but I do know that it is now time for us to jump into a topic we've kind of been saving, but want to get into foundations of property design. That's our bread and butter, showing up to people's properties, taking into account all of their goals, taking into account the way and style that they like to hunt, taking into account who's hunting on the property, their abilities, what the property gives us, what it doesn't give us, what the surrounding properties give us or don't, and handing over at the end of the process a fully, um, I guess, established design. It's going to be in the form of a written report. They're going to get a map with the design drawn out on it. They're also going to get personalized videos from us that describe every element of this design. Before we jump into, breaking down specific properties in the next couple of weeks, I wanted to stop and ask you guys, when it comes to property design, let's talk about some of those foundational elements. Like maybe if I pushed you against the wall and said, "All right, you've got to pick one thing that is your thing, one thing that is your foundational element of a property design, or one foundational principle, or one foundational feature that you're going to be putting in. What is that one thing?" So, since we kicked it off with Jake's buck story, Jake, I'm going to put you in the hot seat first and get your answer to it.
Absolutely. Uh, when I'm looking at a property, I kind of take the same approach on every single one. And even though every property is going to be laid out a little differently depending on where the property is located, you're going to look at. I try to look at it very similar, and it's kind of what I'm trying to accomplish on that property. And to me, that you're trying to create a pattern. You're trying to create a bedding pattern. You're trying to create the food source to pull those deer out of the bedding area to the food source in the afternoon. You're trying to create predictability on the property, because right now, most properties are going to have deer movement. They're going to have deer on that property with or without a habitat design. You know, long before habitat design, deer were on properties and hunters saw deer. However, that movement on the properties is most likely random, and which makes hunting those deer much more difficult. So to me, the foundation of a habitat plan in my eyes, is to create that predictability. You're trying to create the consistent movement on that property, whether that's the doe movement, the buck movement. You want to make sure that you have a good idea as to what these deer are doing on your property and when. And once you have that established, that makes everything else much easier. You can access the property that much easier. You can hunt the property that much easier because you know where these deer are likely going to be. If you have your property set up and you have predictable movement in the morning, you have a pretty good idea where those deer are going to be, and so then you can set up accordingly. And on the flip side, you know where those deer are going to be going in the afternoon, and so then you can hunt that area of your property. So again, to me, the foundation, or what I'm trying to accomplish with every habitat design, is creating that predictable movement, so that we can hunt the property more effectively.
Gotcha. What is, in your experience in your specific region, what's maybe the one thing that contributes most to that predictability piece?
Oh man, so that's going to depend a little bit on the area, like what the neighborhood looks like a little bit. But I would say here in Michigan, like there's two big ones, right? I would say, like, what's going to create that predictable movement, like the pattern, food or cover. That's kind of like what's more important, food or cover. Here in Michigan, I think the most important is cover, high quality cover, and especially if you're trying to target older age class deer. If you don't have high quality cover on your property, there's a good chance that that deer is not going to be living on your property, or close to it. And if he's not on your property, it's going to be that much harder to get a chance at him, because these deer don't move very far during daylight for most of the season. So if you don't have that high quality cover, you know, you're and your neighbors do, they kind of have a little bit of the advantage. So to me, if I had to pick one of the ends of the movement pattern, it would be the best cover in the neighborhood. But that's not to shortchange food, because that's very important too. Food's like the carrot that gets them to move. If you want that's going to tell them which direction they're going to go, where are they going to head in the afternoon. So food's very important too. But if I had to pick one, and you're going to say you could only pick one, it would be security cover.
Yeah, man, that's really, really good. And one of the things that I have found is that, for a lot of properties that you go to, there's an assumption that just because a property has thick spots or thick places or hard to access places, that it's high quality cover. And that is not at all the case. There are a lot of things that go into high quality cover that aren't just, hey, it's thick and nasty and people don't go in there. Like, there's a lot more that goes into that. So I just wrote that down as a future podcast topic. Like, what does it look like? What does it take to have the best cover in the neighborhood? But we don't have time for that today. We've got to move on.
A lot that goes into that.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just thinking about a specific property that I was on just this past year, full of mountain laurel, full of rhododendron, and full of American holly, on these ridge sides. And I started talking with the landowner about incorporating some bedding cover in some of these locations. And it's like, what? We don't need bedding. Look how thick it is. Why would you put bedding cover in there? It's like, because that's trash cover. I mean, it's not. It's thick, yeah, and the deer bed in it, absolutely. But if you give them something else, they're gonna bed somewhere else. They're gonna use cover that provides a few more things than American holly or rhododendron or mountain laurel or something like that. So, Lee, man, let's jump down to you, Mr. Lee from Tennessee. Well, first of all, we've got to introduce Lee from Tennessee. So Lee missed last time. I heard there was a beach involved.
Yeah, it was fall break, so we had a little beach vacation. So did not want to miss the podcast. I just, I felt like I'd get in trouble with the wife if I took work down there. So I hated I missed the first few episodes.
That's all right, man. That's all right. I did the same exact thing last week. Our kids had fall break. We went down to Gulf Shores, Alabama, spent a couple days camping out and having fun. And it was really weird, man. I'm looking at pictures of big bucks on Instagram. Yeah. Kids splashing the waves, out in the Gulf. And it's like, man, this is just, I feel like I'm living in two different worlds right now. With the beach action going on. But Lee is our guy, Whitetail Partners, Tennessee. Lee, same question for you, though. When it comes to foundations of property design, what's going to be the one thing that is where you're going to focus?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And so I'll just start where I always start a plan, and that it's usually done, not with that client. Usually they'll send us, the drop a pin on the parcel. They'll show us the parcel, and a lot of this work. One of the first things I do is without the client, I will take and look at that parcel. And what I like doing is just zooming way out. Zooming out, looking at the neighbors. What does the territory look like? And that way I can start creating a distinct value. What does this property's DNA create, or have the opportunity to create a distinct value versus the neighbors? I think that's got to be step one. And you can tell a whole lot about a property's DNA, just whether it's, they may have an advantage on just a main hub system. They may have really, really good topography that offers bedding. They may have, the majority of the food. They may have ag fields. But every property has strengths and weaknesses based on the seasonal pattern shifts of a deer. So I start and try to figure out, what does this property, what are its strengths in these seasonal pattern shifts? And I start, getting a game plan together of how I want to put that property's habitat plan together based on its strengths and weaknesses for, those seasonal pattern shifts. And you can do that, you know, pretty easily just by zooming out, just taking your time, looking at the neighbors, studying the topography, and it's really good, and it really tees up really strong conversations when you go in there with your client and you show him the strengths of his property and how he can effectively approach it. That's a really, really strong thing to do, and the clients love it. So
Yeah.
that's one of the first things I look at.
That's
every
really
time.
good. Lee, I know you, man, I feel like you've been all over the place. You've done properties in a lot of different places. But just speaking for you locally, kind of where you're at, what's maybe the thing that's missing on a lot of these properties? Like when you do zoom out, what's the thing that you see as like a common occurrence of like, man, this property, if we add this, it's not in the neighborhood and this is going to be a deer vacuum.
Well, so where I live, I'm in West Tennessee, bluff country. We've got tons of topography. We're blessed with topography. I love hunting big bucks and topography. I can tell in 5 seconds pulling up a map, where they should be bedding, where they should be traveling. I would say some of this big timber country, it's food. Definitely when you get kind of towards central Tennessee, where you kind of lose big ag country, it's usually food. You
Right.
start getting into really, really big woods, and you've got a ton of hardwoods, and that's it. And you've got some killer, topography. You got some killer hub systems that you can get on, but it's a flash in the pan as far as nutrition goes for the deer. West Tennessee is different. You have a lot of ag fields in West Tennessee. It's by the Mississippi River naturally. So it's a little bit different, but I'd say a lot of my clients are definitely food deficient. We don't have the proper tonnage that we need. And that's usually you can get it. Sometimes you got to get really creative, and every property's DNA is so different. Like the soil types just vary wildly, and you've got to try to figure out how you can accommodate that, property to give it that distinct value. Sometimes it comes in other ways, but that's what you've got to figure out to be an importer and a holder of a mature buck in Tennessee, very high pressure area. We've got a 3-month consecutive rifle season, which, not wanting to get, I know that's not part of the segment, but I used to think of that as a con, but it really is a pro, because you can do a lot of things to your property to have that distinct value, knowing that there's a lot of pressure around you for a very long time.
Right.
That's the fundamentals of approaching your property is so important in states like Tennessee,
Right.
but they make a big difference.
Yeah, for sure. Lee, I want to follow up on two things. Number one, I'm here in Georgia and I see that food piece a lot too. And again, it's kind of like the cover. There's a lot of assumptions. Hey, there's a lot of green stuff out there, therefore there's high quality food everywhere.
Hmm.
And one, that's not the case. There's just a lot of stuff out there that is not going to be a selected food source. And number two, kind of like you alluded to, to create that patternability like Jake is talking about, we need a consistent food source.
Mm-hmm.
I need a food source that lasts more than 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
That white oak starts dropping and that pattern holds for 4 or 5 days until the acorns are gone.
Yeah.
It doesn't do me a lot of good when I'm trying to pattern big bucks on my property that I'm trying to keep the pressure limited.
Sure.
Second thing I wanted to touch on real quick. We've got long rifle season here in Georgia as well. Obviously, Alabama's got a really long gun season. A lot of southern states, very long and liberal gun seasons and harvest quotas. When it comes to thinking about gun pressure, though, when it comes to setting up a property, I heard a guy talking the other day, and he indicated that he likes designing properties for gun hunting in some of these states with a longer gun season because he can really keep the pressure off of his property.
Yes.
He said, have you ever thought about what it does to have a guy trying to sneak within 25 yards of a trail every single time he goes in? He's like, just sit back 100 yards and shoot the deer when he crosses this. I'm like, I never thought about it because I've always associated, guns go bang, right? Bows don't. So I always thought lower pressure. And he's like, no, I think it's the opposite. What do you think?
Oh, I think he's totally right. Now, like I said, I used to really get irritated by the deer stands on my property line, that are just riddled all over the property line. They actually cut shooting lanes over onto my property line, but there's also trash thrown there. There's a significant amount of intrusion, and I have faith that they're not approaching that appropriately. And what I have seen, these deer are survivors, and when you have that much intrusion, it like to your point, rifle versus bow. I think rifle. That's kind of a loaded question. I mean, and it's a lot of variables with that question, but for sure, you're a lot of the stands in Tennessee. You see them, and they're in the middle of a field, and they're shooting 250, 300 yards away versus a bow situation. You're more liable to intrude on the core of your property into your sanctuary, which is a no-no. That's I have. We all value that sanctuary integrity. We want 80+%, type sanctuary integrity on every property. And rifle, obviously, if you have a rifle hunter, it's easier to achieve that. It's easier to train that client to not intrude on this area. Although that's where all the sign is. You want to go there. Everything in your body wants to go where all that sign is. But that sign is there because it is a sanctuary. It's safe. If you go there and you intrude in the core of your property, you're going to start exporting deer off of your property.
Right.
Unless you have, if you're blessed with larger properties, you may be able to pressure a little bit more. But most average hunters, including myself, if you approach it wrong, you're going to export your deer, and it's going to get them in trouble. It's going to get them killed.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Greg, man, let's make our way around to you. Foundational element of property design that's kind of your one thing.
Yeah, I would say I can kind of dive into once we make it on the property what that foundation is. We kind of have like that overhead look now, and kind of trying to create that predictability. I feel like you can do that by utilizing the natural deer flow through the landscape. I feel like, especially here, I see it a lot in Ohio. There's just ways that deer want to use the land. When you're dealing with that very steep terrain, especially, there's certain land features, kind of like what Lee mentioned, where things just really stick out when you look at maps all the time and you put boots on the ground and you just see how deer want to use the land. And you can really utilize that natural deer flow to piece together the puzzle of how you can create like a system in your property rather than deer working through it. And I feel like once you have that travel figured out, at that point you can really start to stack everything else on the property of how can I make this stronger and stronger. It's not always that one size fits all, like bedding area here, food here, whatever it may be. But I feel like when I can get that travel locked in and I can have a really good sense of, is this going to be just primary deer travel, or does this really make sense for this to be a spot that a buck can work his way through my property and get a whole lot of scent collection on one single trail. And by doing that, I feel like it gives a very good leg up, and it just makes the setups a lot easier. It makes these high quality setups in low intrusion areas more plausible, just because if you know where the deer want to go, you build the plan around it, then it just kind of really all flows together. That's typically what I see, especially down here in Ohio.
Yeah. That brings up a question for me, and I think it relates to all three of you. So I'll just let whoever wants to jump in on this one jump in. Obviously, what the deer already want to do is one of the things that we're taking into consideration. Another thing we're taking into consideration, though, is how we can access, where we can access, and sometimes we need to change what the deer are going to do. We need to provide new options. We need to take away options that they were working with. One of the things we get a lot that I've gotten a lot when working through a plan with somebody is, you've got this stand here. The deer have done this. I've seen deer do this in the past, and it's like, yep, not anymore. We're gonna give them a better way. We're gonna give them a better option. It's like, well, I've seen deer come from over there. It's like, great, let's get a mulcher in here and cut all of it down. Get all of that out of here. How do you guys walk that balance though between what the deer have historically done and what they want to do versus sometimes what we need them to do to get them more predictable?
I think that the big thing is if you have a general idea. So say, like, just for example, I'm taking apart a 40-acre piece of property, and I can go through and I can dissect that 40 acres, in a couple of hours and have a good idea of where every natural deer travel route is on that property. And from there, I can kind of take a step back and say, okay, which of these would be a plus to the plan and which of these don't really line up with what we're trying to do here. And obviously, it's different based off of the landowner. If somebody just wants a general improvement of the property, it's a lot simpler to kind of piece that together. But I work with a lot of guys in Ohio that, their main goal is to get these top tier bucks in their local area. And in order to do that, I feel like that's where you have to give like this plus minus structure to that natural deer travel. And that's where if it is that minus, like, let's find a way to make that as unappealing as possible and make the plus patterns even more appealing. And eventually the natural tendency is just going to take over and just going to keep doubling down on those plus travel patterns.
All right. Very good. Jake, were you going to add on to that?
Yeah. I was going to say something similar to what Greg was saying there. Is there's going to be a lot of trails on the property, and there's going to be some that make sense to incorporate into the habitat plan and some that don't. And so you can always, like Greg said, discourage some trails or completely block them, like what you said, to try to hopefully get those deer to only use the trails that you want them to. And if for some reason the deer are currently not doing what we want them to, like the current pattern is not ideal for the hunting situation, then one thing that we can do a lot of times to pull the deer in a certain direction is use food to do that, especially on these smaller properties. If you have 20 acres and you put a food source on one side of that property, well, now you're going to start pulling deer from the other side to that food source. And so that's what I've had to do on several designs and several of my own properties when they're smaller like that. Is if I have hunting pressure on one side of the property and I want to pull those deer away from that hunting pressure, I'm going to put food on the opposite side of that. So my pattern, I'm still going to have that bed to feed pattern, but I'm going to pull them in the opposite direction. Now, are they every once in a while going to go that way? Sure. I mean, deer are deer, but what we're trying to do is keep them on our property as long as we can to hopefully, at least during daylight. If they go over there at night, who cares? But we're trying to keep them on our property as long as we can to either increase the huntability of the property, but also increase the survival rate of these younger bucks. That's another big key here in Michigan. Is we just need these bucks to get older, and so you just got to keep them on your property for as long as possible.
Yeah, that brings what you just mentioned brings to mind a design element that we just implemented. I guess it would have been back in March or April. We knew on this one property boundary we were getting a lot of pressure, and this individual was killing quite a few deer. Baiting is legal here in Georgia. As soon as the deer would cross that property line to the bait pile, they were getting shot. A lot of young bucks going missing up in that portion of the property. So it took a lot of time, but we ended up creating barriers and new trails and travel corridors to weave them away from that property line. And then we put a nice chunk of food right there in the middle to sort of anchor that movement and give them an alternative route. And it has absolutely worked wonders. Now, gun season is just getting going here, so we'll see what the end result will be. But we're seeing a lot of young bucks on camera, and they're not disappearing. So I think there are some good things ahead. But Lee, I wanted to get to you on this front because you recently did something on your property. We made a video about it on the Whitetail Partners YouTube channel, actually. Yeah. That super interesting. So tell me about your scenario.
Well, that was the access video. I do want to just make a quick comment on travel manipulation and issues like you were talking about with your neighbor. Food source right there. I love, if you have a situation where you have a lot of intrusion on a property line, feed, right across the property line, and you've got a place on your property that's really hot, but you normally could not access that in a normal situation. I love when I know that I have intrusion from a neighbor that I can't control. That's always free access for you on your property. Does that make sense?
Right.
You can use that access, and that intrusion from you degrades the value of that area as well, on top of barriers. So that's if it allows, I will sometimes create access that I know is, if I have somebody on the property line, I will do that to devalue that area, but then gain access to a better part of my property.
Right.
And as I'm pushing deer to my core.
Right. And you're making the assumption with that too, that, that area is already getting the pressure.
It is.
So why not you be the one in there applying some of that pressure as well?
Exactly. Well, exactly. So no, but back to the access. So another thing, there's barriers, there's travel manipulation, there's, you can encourage food, water. One thing that, access is in and out. That's what we preach. You've got to get in and out. If your goal is to consistently, harvest mature bucks, if you want to be an importer, a holder, a grower of mature bucks, you've got to really pay attention to your access in and out. And this particular stand that I have is on my personal property. It's an observation stand. It's over a food plot. It's really good for taking kids. You see a lot of deer, but I don't hunt my food sources very often. It's usually just when I want to take a kid to see a lot of deer. But I will hunt those, late season food sources. This is a whole nother topic, for that roamer type buck or your resident bucks that are coming and trying to rebuild. Late season's killer on those food plots. But this particular instance, this stand, I had a killer, this bedding area between my access route to that stand. And it was an old logging, they logged this little valley. And those skidders, when you have highly erosive soils, they make those little berms to slow the erosion down. Well, it was a south-facing slope, and it had these little unnatural berms all through there and all this regenerative growth, all around those berms. It was a perfect bedding area. And, boy, they sucked in there, and it made it literally impossible to walk to that stand. Right. So I destroyed it, and we do destroy a lot of, sometimes some habitat that's in the way that's not advantageous to that client. Sometimes you just have to get rid of it, to enhance that area. So that was, and it's a lot of fun doing that too.
Absolutely. And that's, one of the things that I do just want to point out, conversations with folks is like, well, what, there's a state biologist who's going to come out here to my property. What do you guys do that's different than what the state biologist is going to tell me? And it's like, well, the state biologist, his number one priority is your habitat, period. And he would never tell you to remove an area of high quality habitat so that you can access and hunt better, unless he's, obviously a very dedicated hunter or something like that. We are going to be on the opposite end. We're going to be looking at, okay, we're hunters primarily. Do we care about the habitat? Absolutely, we care about the habitat. We're not just going to destroy it and not give them something else. We're going to give the deer something else. We're going to create bedding possibilities in other locations. But yeah, sometimes you just got to break out a chainsaw and bring in bring in a skidder or bring in, what was that you had? The forestry mulcher, huh?
Yeah, it was. We got access to forestry mulcher, and this was more of like a brush cutter on that one, and then a track hoe. We had some pretty large pecans in there, and it was rotten. I would have left the pecan, but so yeah, we just got rid of all of it.
Man, it looked like a lot of fun.
It really was.
It had me researching prices of some of those forestry mulchers because I was like, man, I could get one of those. I could handle one of those. Then I saw it was like a smooth $130,000 to really get into anything. So I was like, I'm good. I'm good.
Man, and I promise you, accessing that stand, 2 years ago, I had the biggest buck of my life that I did end up harvesting, but he was in this area, and there was just a single doe that was in there every morning. And as soon as I got out, and as soon as I started walking, she would blow and run right back in to where his core was. I just went back home. And you have to manipulate some of those things, to your advantage.
Right.
So sometimes it's not, some things we want to do, and sometimes that can get a little pricey, but sometimes it's pretty cheap. So
right.
That was pretty extreme.
Well, and you can accomplish just about anything with a bunch of sweat equity. Like, it can be pricey
Exactly.
in there, but with a chainsaw and some hand tools, you can accomplish just about anything that you want to if you're committed enough, because sometimes it can take quite a bit of labor. But folks, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. This was awesome. Really appreciate talking about the foundations of habitat and property design. Guys, if you want to learn more, you can head over to our website, whitetailpartners.com. You can find us on YouTube, Whitetail Partners, and check out Lee and some folks that he knows destroying an awesome bedding area, and get the lowdown on that. But guys, thanks for the conversation tonight. Appreciate it.